Welcome and thank you for joining us on DisrupTV. My name is Vala Afshar. I'm the Chief Digital Evangelist at Salesforce and your co-host for the next hour. We welcome you to follow us on Twitter at DisrupTV Show. Send Ray, myself, and our distinguished guests your questions live using hashtag DisrupTV, and we'll do our best to answer them. It's my pleasure to introduce my co-host in person, which hasn't happened. The last time we did a show in person, we were interviewing Arianna Huffington, if you remember. But my co-host Ray is the founder, CEO of Constellation Research. He's the best-selling author of Disrupting Digital Business. I see him on the news all the time, Fox, Bloomberg, CNBC. And in my humble opinion, one of the top futurists to follow on Twitter at RWANG0. Welcome, Ray, in person.
This is awesome. I am here, Salesforce, Ohana, Northeast. Never been here in the studio. Here's my awesome co-host, Vala Afshar. As you guys know, he's the #1 follower for CMOs, CIOs, and even now CEOs on Twitter. Awesome advice. Also, a best author himself on TV. But more importantly, we're here to talk about awesome guests like the one we have today. A very, very, very special guest. Who do we have on the show, Vala?
What a privilege and honor for us to have Criado Perez as our first guest. She's the author of Invisible Woman, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. Caroline is a writer, broadcaster, feminist activist, named Liberty Human Rights Campaigner of the Year, and awarded Most Excellent Order of the British Empire by the Queen. Oh, that's just unbelievable.
It sounds ridiculous when you say it like that.
It is such an unbelievable, by the way, we only have a 20-minute show, so I have to shorten your bio. She has a degree in English language literature from University of Oxford and studied behavioral and feminist economics at London School of Economics. She won the Financial Times and McKinsey 2019 Business Book of the Year, awarded for the book we're going to be talking about, Invisible Woman. She's also author of a book titled Do It Like a Woman, published in 2015, which was amazing. Please follow Caroline on Twitter at CCRIADOPEREZ. Welcome, Caroline, to DisrupTV.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. And, look, incredible honor to have you on the show. What we really wanted to spend some time is talking about some of the interesting insights in the book. What's interesting to me is you've quantified the obvious, right? That should have been very obvious, but start here. What made you decide to write the book?
Well, really, it was that I experienced that moment that I hope a lot of people experience when they read the book, of suddenly realizing, I should have asked this before. What's your position on swearing?
No, go.
Do what you need to do.
Well, when we make the blog, we'll take it out.
It will be bleeped out of the book. This is you have a consensus.
Okay, I just don't want to offend Americans. So yeah, I wanted to give people the experience that I had, which was, holy shit, I don't know what's going on in my own head. I had this experience in my mid-20s when I went to university to study for an undergraduate degree. I went a little bit late, and prior to that point, I had, you say I'm a feminist activist. I had not been a feminist activist. I would have laughed you out of the room if you'd said I was going to end up a feminist activist. I thought feminism was so stupid. I thought it was embarrassing. I was embarrassed by it. Men and women are equal now. This is just, basically an excuse for women who are just a bit rubbish and can't be bothered to put the work in. And yeah, I mean, it's embarrassing, but that's what I thought. It's best to be honest about these things.
Then you had to go to the bathroom. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I had to read this book called Feminism and Linguistic Theory, and it just completely changed my life, despite it having a slightly wonkish title, because it made me realize what was going on in my head. So basically, it had this section about the generic masculine in language. So he to mean he or she, man to mean humankind. Obviously, in languages like French and German and various other gendered languages, it's much more interwoven. But in English, it's just this. And I think, like a lot of people who don't know much about feminism, I had actually heard, that feminists, God, they're so stupid, right? They have a problem with he to mean he or she when everyone knows it means he or she. God, how trivial. This just shows how stupid feminism is. That was my reaction to it. Like, I think a lot of people, because it sounds so stupid. But then I read this line that I'd never heard before, which was actually, when people hear these words, they picture a man. And that just blew my mind, because I realized for the first time that I was picturing men when I heard these words. And it wasn't just that realization. It was also, how have I never noticed this before? I'm 26. I'm a woman. If this is generic, why am I not picturing women at least 50% of the time. But really more was why have I not noticed it? It was just so shocking to me. And then I realized actually it went way beyond that. It was for pretty much any gender neutral term. So like lawyer, doctor, politician, you know, scientist, anything. I would just picture men. And so just this realization that this was going on in my head without my knowing it just really made me start to question so many things. Because I think we all like to think of ourselves as objective, and we put a very high faith in our objectivity, and it's seen as bad to be subjective, which is rubbish. Like, it's nonsense. Everyone is subjective. That's just reality. We're not objective because we're not machines. Although we can get into how subjective machines are later.
Bias in human machines. No.
Yeah. So I think I was kind of primed to notice when there was an assumption that men represented the gender neutral, that men represented the universal, that men were the default. So I you know, as you say, I went and studied behavioral and feminist economics, and there I discovered how our entire economy is built around basically half of humanity. And then I, you know, remember discovering the asylum policy, the international convention, the UN Convention on Refugees, you know, this amazing document that was drawn up with the best of intentions. Absolutely no way that was deliberately drawn up to make it harder for women to claim asylum than men, but has been drawn up in such a way that it is harder for women to claim asylum than men, because they have done things like you have to be able to leave the country you're fleeing from before you can claim asylum. That's just much harder for women. They're less likely to be able to travel legally, get a visa. You have to be able to prove that you're being persecuted for a specific set of reasons. Those reasons don't include sex and gender, even though that's the main reason that women are being persecuted. So I was sort of noticing these examples as I sort of continued along my life, I guess. And then finally, I came across the gender data gap in medicine and discovered that there was this same assumption that the male body was the neutral universal body in medicine, and that women were dying because we were misdiagnosing them, because we didn't have the right treatment for them, and all because of this completely misguided idea that men are neutral, men are gender neutral, basically. And at that point, I kind of lost my shit, and like, I have to write a book about this. So yeah, that is why, basically, because I lost my shit. That's what happened.
Well, I mean, in your book, you reference transportation systems, medical devices and treatments, tax structures, consumer products. We'll talk about the iPhone, perhaps even, you know, smartphones, voice recognition, logic and technology. But you did, you know, talk about misdiagnosing women because of symptoms and heart attacks. And the clinical trials didn't include women. So the end result was you didn't have effective treatment and you had more side effects. Of all these areas that you discovered, and including your book, was there one that you like, I can't believe, like shocking? I mean, all of it sounds unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean,
you really lost your shit.
I think it's quite hard to pick one because they are all really shocking.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do two things. First of all, I'm going to tell you a story that I just found kind of hilarious in a really dark way. So as you say, we know far more about heart disease in men, despite the fact that it's the #1 killer of women in the US and the EU. Women are more likely to die following a heart attack than men. And that's been the case since 1984. Women are 50% more likely to be misdiagnosed. And this is because the research has been heavily biased towards men. And I came across this very interesting story about Viagra. So for those of you who don't know how Viagra was discovered, it was discovered by accident, a happy accident, one might say, which was in a drug trial for heart medication, and specifically an all-male drug trial for heart medication. Anyway, it turned out Viagra is not that great for curing your heart disease, but it does have this happy side effect. And, you know, within a few years, Viagra was rolled out, and, you know, and like, that's a good thing, right? Because erectile dysfunction is a serious problem and men need medication for it. So it's good that that happened. Fast forward, so this is like the late 90s, Viagra got released. Fast forward to 2013, and a researcher realizes that the active ingredient in Viagra quite possibly could be very useful for dealing with period pain.
Oh.
And there isn't really anything out there that works for period pain. Definitely not over the counter. You can get some stuff on prescription, but it has quite a lot of side effects, and it's just not ideal. So, and that affects a lot of women. A huge number of women are very debilitated by period pain. And you tell this to any woman and their eyes light up and go, what?
But why did it take so long?
Primary hypothesis was that it would provide 4 hours of pain relief with no side effects. By this point, I'm falling off my chair. However, they completed a small scale trial, which was very promising, but they ran out of funding, and they have since then, despite several applications to the National Institute of Health, been unable to get funding to complete this trial. And the reason for that is that it is not seen as enough of a public health priority. And so basically,
so we're gonna get
can't advise
GoFundMe page.
Advise people to take Viagra because we don't know exactly if it works or not, or what the side effects might be. But I just sort of think that's a really fascinating example of how this works. What if we'd included women at that initial trial stage? Might we have a drug for period pain by this point? So that was an example that I guess kind of made me laugh at the ridiculousness of it, particularly the point that we now can't get funding to find out whether or not this would actually work for women.
Are we going to set up a GoFundMe page for this?
I mean, we could try, I guess. Because the thing is, private companies don't want to fund it for various reasons. Like they don't tend to fund independent researchers. Also, they don't want to damage the potential revenue that already is being created by this drug. So there isn't a financial incentive. Also, because we have so little data on women, I think it's hard for them to understand exactly what the financial case would be, which is a problem you run up against a lot, actually, in innovation for women when it comes to funding, sort of private funding, like venture capital funding, is having enough data to be able to make a really good business case, just because we aren't collecting enough data on women. But the thing that I found most shocking wasn't actually an example. It was the excuses that I came across. Because, by the time, like I'm very understanding of people who just have forgotten women, because I know that I'd been doing that, and we all do that. And that's quite normal. Like, I think you mentioned iPhones. I think often of the Apple healthcare app, the tracker app, that you could track your molybdenum, which no one has ever even heard of, and your copper intake, which no one knows how to measure, but you couldn't track your period. And, I just think it's just not credible that Apple did that deliberately, right? They just forgot that periods exist. Let's be honest, that's what happened. And they forgot that periods exist because they didn't have enough people with periods on their design team. It's a very open and shut case of what happened there. That was not a deliberate, malicious.
What about the hardware design of the phone? Can you speak a little bit about that as well?
Well, I mean, basically, there is not enough research on this, which was very frustrating for me, because it's a particular passion of mine ever since I got RSI from my iPhone 6. And I wanted to find out, is there any research into the effects of increasing handset size on hands? And specifically, is there sex disaggregated data on this? And basically, there just isn't anything out there. There is research showing that, yes, increased phone size does have an impact on hand and wrist health, but the data has not been sex disaggregated, even though logically it would be worse for women, because women have on average smaller hands than men. But there is really interesting research that I found that sort of shines a light on it from a very unlikely quarter, perhaps, which is the classical music sphere. Where basically there's been a fair amount of research into hand size for pianists. So basically, and the reason I think this is so interesting is, okay, it's not like nobody's going to die from this, and it's not the most common issue that you're going to encounter, like a concert pianist with hand issues. But I think it's really interesting in terms of, have you ever considered the idea that a piano might be unfair to women. Like that just would never occur to you. Why would you think about that? It's just a piano. But of course it makes sense when you think about it, because your hands are having to interact with the keyboard, and the keyboard is too big for women's hands, basically. And they've done this really fascinating research looking at hand size distribution and the level of international acclaim that concert pianists have. Wow. And basically it's hugely connected to hand size.
You gotta be able to, they gotta hold an octave.
Right. I mean, but more than an octave, and an octave is you know, a stretch for a lot of average female hand sizes. And so essentially women are designed out in many ways from achieving the top of their game in classical music. But also, you know, there has been some research again into the effect on hand health, like levels of arthritis and all sorts of, you know, hand issues. Again, not sex disaggregated data, which is basically a problem I came up against again and again and again. But they did find, you know, that smaller hand sizes, it was an all-male study, but men with smaller hand sizes were more likely to suffer hand health problems. So I sort of stick that together and strongly suggest that the ever-increasing size of handheld devices is inevitably going to be causing hand health problems for women. But, you know, again, I don't believe that that's a deliberate thing. You know, I don't think smartphone designers hate women. I think they just haven't thought about it, because we're so used to thinking of the, you know, of men as just this neutral, which is basically what the excuses are. The excuses that you get are things like, well, we can't include women in this medical trial because, you know, the menstrual cycle will interfere with the results. Well, yes, that's why you have to include it, you know, because those interferences can be really significant. Or another excuse that's quite popular is, we'll start off in men, you know, the neutral sex, and then we'll add women at a later date if we discover anything interesting, which is a really perfect, you know, sort of evocation of the argument that I'm making, that we think of men as neutral, but also it's actually really dangerous. Like one study I came across in the course of my research was looking at male and female cells and then exposing them to estrogen and then exposing them to a virus. And basically the female cells were able to use the estrogen to fight off the virus, but the male cells weren't. And so they couldn't fight off the virus. And so you think about that, right? And if you start off in male cells, which most trials do, you would conclude, oh, well, estrogen doesn't do anything, and you wouldn't develop it any further. So I think that was the thing I found most shocking, because, you know, I don't really mind people not knowing, but medical researchers are aware of the huge issues for women of not including them in trials. And that pisses me off.
So would you say the solution then is to make sure that when we're trying to design these solutions, like the first principles, the root cause is really not including this in the design thinking, right? I mean, this is the empathy aspect where you've got to consider it from all different areas. Gender is one aspect of it. There are probably other elements that we typically don't do.
Absolutely.
But and what's scary?
Well, there's really good examples from, like, you know, I did a radio show the other day, and the presenter was talking about how when she uses, you know, the automatic hand wash, the sensor doesn't see her hands, you know, because her hands are too dark, and they've only been tested on white hands, you know, and
wow.
See, what's scary is that when we're talking about like physical entities like a phone, you can see it, but as we move to automation, autonomous, algorithmic economy, how do you identify these blind spots in algorithms when the world is becoming software?
Yeah.
And all of our, you know, beliefs are now being codified into algorithms, and if it excludes 51% of the population, I mean, what? So you're going to be writing a lot of books.
You got a lot more books coming out of you.
Oh God, I hope not. But I mean, yeah, it's terrifying, because you know, we're basically literally coding inequality into our future. But it's worse because, you know, algorithms, machine learning, it amplifies the biases that we feed it, and there's very good evidence to show this, and it amplifies them by a really significant amount. So, you know, basically it gets better and better at being biased. You know, that's what we're doing at the moment.
Have companies that are really emphasizing their growth trajectory built on top of AI, are they reaching out to you for, you know, consulting and guiding them to better understand. I mean, this is frightening, really. It really is.
I have had one company reach out to me for guidance on helping with their data gap issues with their AI, but no, not a huge number. But I mean, I have been contacted by a lot of people, researchers, people in government, who have read the book and are trying to make things better, which is fantastic. And I know there are people, excuse me, within companies that are trying to do it. But yeah, you're right. Those goddamn algorithm companies should be getting in touch with me and asking me to fix their problems.
I'm with you.
There you have it.
You know what? You might be able to help with that.
We might be able to help with that.
Yeah.
So, Carolyn Criado Perez, special guest, writing the book, Invisible Women Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. Please check out her book. Check her out on Twitter at CCRIADOPEREZ. Thank you so much for being on DisrupTV. We'll definitely get you back on. So.
Terrific. Thank you so much. We learned
Great
a lot.
to be here. Thank you.
Happy Valentine's Day.
And you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Wow.
It's you're going to see a lot of this, especially in AI. We're about to enter an era where it's going to be, when do we apply intelligent automation? When do we augment the machine with the human? When do we augment the human with the machine? And when do we trust human judgment? And that data bias in all different areas is going to be exposed very, very quickly. We're going to see that. We're going to be able to codify that and understand where we've gone wrong. But who do we have next? We've got a very, very special guest as well.
We talked about AI algorithms, and now we're going to talk about the technology that some believe may be as impactful, even more impactful than the internet. So we're here with Raj Rao, General Manager at IBM Food Trust. Raj serves as General Manager of IBM Food Trust, the world's only enterprise-class blockchain platform that is solely focused on enhancing efficiency, safety, transparency of the global food supply chain. In his role, Raj leads the platform and business expansion of IBM Food Trust with ecosystem players involving the world's leading retailers, consumer good companies, food suppliers, and growers through shared, permissioned, and secure blockchain data network that are fueled by AI and cognitive applications. So it's really a combination of these incredible emerging technologies. Raj previously was a CEO of Ford Mobility, incredible amount of innovation and achievements in that previous role as well. You can follow Raj on Twitter at SFRAJRAO. Welcome, Raj, to DisrupTV.
Thank you very much, Vala, and great to see you again, Ray. How are you doing?
Yeah, we're doing great, man. You're doing what I'm normally doing, broadcasting live in motion. This is mobility.
I'm in an autonomous vehicle is actually driving at 70 miles an hour. So
this is awesome. Hey, so you basically, I think people should understand your background first before we get here, because you do not have the traditional IBM executive background. You've been doing so many different things, including the Ford Mobility, which we talked about a little. Give everyone a context of like how you got to where you got to in this role. And then of course, it's going to be fun talking about the networks, the blockchain, the other things that you've been doing with a lot of these, a lot of what you've been doing with Food Trust.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So like most of you, I'm a student of innovation, and that passion was not to date myself, but at the time that a book called In Search of Excellence was making business waves. And as you probably remember in that book, I mean, it's not a new book. It's the best-selling business book ever. So, amongst other things, I hope you have it there. It's a good book to have. But these two McKinsey guys, including I'm sure you did. So these two McKinsey guys. Okay, so Tom Peters, one of the storied guys who wrote that book, had studied 65 companies, and he distilled it down to 42, 43 companies, and a very simple 7-chapter thesis, framework around how do these companies become great? How do companies survive 100 years, and how do they stay on top of their game? And there are obviously some common elements, and one of them happened to be this kind of culture of innovation, and wanting to always be at the forefront of things that people cared about and people would pay money to buy and place a value. So when I was doing my MBA, I decided that I would want to work for as many of those companies as possible. And I was very fortunate. My first job was with Procter & Gamble, and one of the assignments I had was to help the company in an innovation project they were doing around cosmetics and being able to transform their healthcare and beauty care businesses. So I did that for a few years. And then my next, opportunity to work one of these excellent companies was 3M, which,
Wow.
back when Google didn't exist, 3M already kind of culture was one of, customer inspired innovation. You gotta be, they call it follow the smokestacks, where they would arm their sales teams to go out in the field, find factories, go call on the factories and find out how can you improve process, right? How can you improve outcomes? And they would come back to the lab and bring customer inspired stories and build great innovation outcomes. So I continued that path. And I should tell you that before I got my job at P&G, my internship actually was with IBM. And I was a kid then. And last year when I had my first kind of trip with IBM out to meet clients in Europe, I happened to go to the same location in London South Bank where I'd done my internship 29 years ago.
Oh,
Wow.
So full cycle, I joined 3M, became chief digital officer of the company. Again, around at that time, the disruptive force was Amazon, IoT, service business models wrapped around product. So I got introduced to a lot of senior people at IBM that had partnered with 3M to build things that you and I use every day, including the phone, the haptic engine phone and the touchscreen system in the phone, how the glass stays on the surface and why it doesn't break when it's dropped. All that stuff was kind of inventions of 3M, So, I learned a lot, got close to some key people at IBM, and here I am. I think, the IBM that you probably see from the outside is very different than the IBM I see from the inside, right? And from the outside, it's all about patents, about great innovations, about platform tech. What I see from the inside is a culture of innovative people. Sure. And with great ideas, and I work in a part of the business now that is very innovative. And so I'm really excited. I think being a student of innovation is not really a job. It's, it's a real passion that I have and I enjoy it.
That's amazing. Yeah, IBM for 26 years in a row has been the #1 patent source of any company in the world, averaging almost 10,000 patents a year, which it's unbelievable. It's so certainly a culture of innovation. Congratulations on your new CEO. But let's talk about the IBM Food Trust. How did it get started? Why was it formed? What are the problems you're trying to solve? And who else is involved in this ecosystem around
Sure.
Food Trust?
So I'll tell you the problems that get solved here. So, every minute, someone in the U.S. is falling sick from a foodborne illness.
Wow.
Every 15 minutes, $5 million worth of food is being thrown out, wasted. Okay, and that's got, and then over 50% of the seafood in New York and many other states in the U.S. are mislabeled or fraud. So solving these problems is not something that should be ignored. So Food Trust reason for existence.
Like farm fresh, line caught salmon is really like not farm. It's farm raised.
Ray, I don't want to disappoint you, but odds are it's not, right? And it's not for anybody's. It's not one person's fault. It's just the way things have evolved over time, right? So food supply chains, as you know, are very, very global. So to answer your question, I think the inspiration for this project came from the world's largest retailer of food and many other things, Walmart. And they said, hey, if I'm going to be selling, fresh cut mangoes, and if I need to know if somebody walks up to me and says, where did this come from? I should be able to answer that question. And I shouldn't say, well, this guy supplied it to me. So I think the inspiration came from Frank Yanis, who at the time was with Walmart, a really successful leader that was concerned about answering questions like that. So he challenged IBM to say, can we answer that together? So that led one thing to another. And obviously, the premise for that whole project was the three things I mentioned to you: trust in labeling, reduce waste, full traceability if there's food recall issues. And we've done that well, and that's helped us build a industry offering. But I think the inflection point occurred a little later when Carrefour came up to us and said, we're a European-based retailer. We love, all the things you've helped Walmart solve, but we have a consumer confidence opportunity and a consumer branding opportunity. We'd like our brands that we sell to tell stories about who made the product, where the product comes from, and authenticity in labeling. Can you guys work with us? And that's been a very successful, investment for both sides in kind of telling that story as well. And in that journey, we've attracted a lot of brands like Nestle to come on board and share in that storytelling. So it's going pretty well. I think retailers obviously have been the mainstay of what we do, but we're increasingly seeing the extended ecosystem partake in this.
So how does blockchain play a role in this? This seems to be more than blockchain, right? I mean, it seems to be an ecosystem, seems to be a coalition.
Mm-hmm.
You guys even won an award from us it was a Constellation Supernova Award winner for this. So share a little bit of why it's more than blockchain and why blockchain plays a role.
Yeah, Ray, great question. I think, to answer these and solve these issues, we've got to have access to a lot of data that people generally don't share or systems don't share because we are siloed, whether we like it or not. Even within the food supply chain, there are so many different actors and nobody can use one system, right? So by default, data is siloed. And the second issue is industry governance, right? So suppliers supply competing retailers, and there's private labels. So there's inherent business conflict in the model of retail. So, when you think about enterprise blockchain and the idea of trust and how do you manage trust, i.e. permission data, and how do you ensure the data that you're sharing is immutable so that you can actually deal with traceability with confidence. It sounded like blockchain would be a great solution for us, but the things that were missing was a governance framework and a data sharing model, and also trusted permission networks. So we had to go and convene ecosystems that would collaborate without having to have overreach in each other's data. They just had to see enough about the events of transformation to be able to have confidence that that was the supply chain. So blockchain was a very logical path for us. But when we overlay AI and we overlay IoT, it gets really interesting. So I think it's not that blockchain is a solution to all problems. I think it's one of the three in the holy trifecta. And the word you mentioned really kind of distinguished IBM as being one of the companies that had brought those three things together to really solve a problem and do it in a, recognizing that you don't want IBM to own the data. You don't want IBM to be the adjudicator of trust. You don't want IBM to control, who gets to extract value and doesn't extract value. So it's really helping us play out the convening role very successfully.
Sure. You talked about waste, you talked about trust and optimization of processes and scale. If you look back 50 years ago, there was only 3 mega cities defined by 10 million population or more. I think Mexico City, Tokyo, and New York. According to World Economic Forum, UN, if you look at 2050, you're going to have 50 mega cities, and you have a population of close to 10 billion that we have to feed. And it means 70% more production of food than 2019 in order to be able to address this 7.4 billion today population to 10 billion in 30 years from now. And a third of prepared food is wasted today. So when you think about disruption and use of emerging technologies like AI and blockchain, can you talk to us about trends regarding food consumption and production and how you see efficiencies and changing markets when we look ahead 10, 20, 30 years from now?
Thanks for that question. Well, I just got back from Peru. Okay, I spent a few days there, and it's a breadbasket economy, as you know. So I met with farmers, cooperatives. I met with tech companies, and I also met obviously people that are deeply involved in the cocoa industry. So the reality when you talk about feeding the next billion, right? It's not just an issue of removing waste, because that waste comment I made is essentially a U.S. problem.
Okay.
It's not going to feed that waste. Is not going to removing that waste and feed the growing population, which happens to be in everywhere other than the U.S. Right? So it happens to be in Africa, happens to be in Asia.
Sure.
So we have to add supply in a thoughtful way. What that means is we have to address the issue of sustainability, and at the same time address the issue of access to food technology. I think we need to do both at the same time. So what I heard from my conversation with people at the grassroots of this is we've got to give more people access to farm tech and financing, which means that the fact that they don't even have title to the land they're growing stuff on, and they have no records of sales because they sell to a cooperative which washes the cocoa and then sells it to traders, and then there's no trace back to the farmer, and there's they don't have a bankable ID. They don't have the equivalent of Dun & Bradstreet score, right? They don't have a credit score. So how are you going to help these farmers improve productivity, and do sustainable farming. Well, you have to create a way to bank them, right? So one of the projects we did late last year that I mentioned to Ray was with the coffee industry, where we wanted to very much tokenize farmers, let them tell us how much they're selling the crop for, who are they selling it to, how much are they selling, and give us a sense of, their work. And that, aspect of Farmer Connect helps us on blockchain to create a way for banks to do microloans or give them structured finance so they can invest in infrastructure and invest in improving crop yield and do it in a sustainable way so they can earn a higher price for their crop. So that's one half of the problem. The other half of the problem is food waste in the middle of the supply chain. So you and I want to eat fresher food.
Yeah.
You and I want to eat food that's grown sustainably. We want it to be organic to the extent that it's possible, and we like it to be local. So to do all of those things, you have to orchestrate supply chains in a completely different way. You have to make them, much more local, and you have to help them get fresher product to you faster. So that's where the work we've done with Golden State Foods, for example, has played specifically into that. They are one of the largest suppliers to the fast food and quick serve industries, where you have large volumes of that supply chain moving fresh away from frozen. So between those two extremes, you'll see where most work that we are currently doing fall under, either close to the farm or close to the middle and end of the supply chain.
Now, on one hand, like the technology is hard, but it seems like building a coalition is even harder. So talk a little bit about that, because there are competing interests in these areas. And how do you get everyone to some, I don't know, as Paul Greenberg calls it, a commonwealth of self-interest? So
yeah, so it's not easy to do, but we're doing our best. We convened what is called an advisory council, Ray. You'll have an opportunity to meet many of them soon. So the advisory council's role is to protect data primarily, but also to convene a joint industry point of view of what change needs to occur and at what pace that change needs to be executed against the time frame. The Advisory Council of Food Trust comprises the biggest names in food retailing and food brands. So you'd find Nestle involved, you'd find Carrefour involved, you'd find Walmart, Albertsons, and Dole and Driscoll. These companies all have a common mandate and a common vision of the future of how food gets handled. So we focus on those commonalities, and then we say what change do we want to advocate for as a group and as a team, and what are we prepared to do jointly that would move things forward. So we run these meetings monthly with the executive council of the advisory group, and we put a charter around it. But the interesting thing, Ray, is that the behavioral shift at IBM is equally interesting to observe here, which is this concept, what I learned early in my career was the concept of open innovation, right? Where you let your clients help you figure out what you should invest in and what to prioritize, and bring in new ideas and build solutions in the market that are really outside in. And I think we're getting really good at that, for example, with Food Trust, where we let this council not just tell us what the aspiration is, but also govern us, right? Govern Food Trust. So I think it's a symbiotic relationship where they are changing and they're expecting us to also change the way we do things. And we've had a lot of success so far convening those conversations. And I think that's the way it's going to probably play out going forward too.
My last question to you, Walmart invested in smart robots doing the inventory analysis in their stores. By doing that, they were able to shift 35,000 Walmart employees through Walmart University, training them to be personal shoppers. So with a multi-billion-dollar investment in Jet to give them e-commerce capability, and solving that last mile with now an army of personal shoppers, including companies like Amazon that spent billions getting Prime users one-day access to foods and services. Do you believe that Food Trust and using AI and blockchain and really optimizing a process around food, that may be a lever in terms of adoption of e-commerce for companies like Walmart that can really benefit from having a secure, trusted ecosystem that will really serve their digital consumers, in the very near future?
Absolutely, well said. I think the autonomous future is already upon us, right? So we already participate in it every time we use a Fetch Me app So
Right.
fetch me prepared food, and it's mostly ghost kitchens, as you know now, and sight unseen. So when you roboticize how you execute against the way you and I are behaving, the
Right.
more efficient you're going to get, because you can't use the old methods to solve that problem. So
Right.
what you're describing here is really the kind of things that we need those robots to be able to verify the food, verify quality, verify provenance, put it and deliver it with trust and confidence that that customer is going to come back and buy even more. So,
Absolutely.
it's not just Walmart that's playing in the forefront of that. Many other companies are, and we appreciate that question very much. I think that's the way we see it. We see trust being more and more automated.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, it's an autonomous decade, right? Self-driving, self-healing, self-sensing. We're going to see a lot of that. We're here with Raj Rao, General Manager, IBM Food Trust. And more importantly, you can follow him on Twitter at SF Raj Rao. He is live. He's in motion. And of course, he's out in the valley. So we'll see you soon. Thanks. Thanks a lot for being on the show.
Yeah, just so you're terrific.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing. Who is it? Future is already here, just unevenly distributed. And our guests remind us of that every week. It's incredible to think about, the importance of trust and automation in the food industry, and it's going to explode. I mean, e-commerce right now is only about 15% of transactions, but projections are by 2030 it could be as much as 50%. So what we typically do when we talk about wide variety of topics like Viagra and cocoa beans, we bring Ron Miller to help synthesize.
Tie it together.
For us. So it's our pleasure to have Ron Miller, who's the enterprise technology reporter for TechCrunch. Ron's been a freelance technology journalist, one of the more prominent journalists in our space since 1998. And he is, without a doubt, first ballot Hall of Fame Disrupt inductee, who will receive 100% of the votes, unlike Derek Jeter. And please follow Ron on Twitter. He's a must follow on Twitter, and read his blogs at Ron_Miller, Miller. Welcome back. I'm guessing a dozen appearances, Ron Miller, to DisrupTV.
Thanks, guys. It's always great to be here.
So we got a lot of topics we can go. Where do you want to go?
Very, very busy week.
We got Snowflake, IPO, we've got coronavirus and Mobile World Congress, the state of Google Cloud. What's up with Xerox, CI Jedi, and Ken Gluck? I mean, it's crazy.
So what do you want to start with?
What's going on this week? What's not on your mind?
Want to start with Snowflake?
Let's go with Snowflake. It's a nice one.
$12 billion.
It's a big deal, right? Snowflake, as you know, is a cloud data warehouse. It's agnostic. It works in all the clouds, and I think one of the reasons that it's attracting the attention of investors and customers and the cloud vendors themselves is that it has this ability to be this kind of neutral, data holder where you can. And right now, one of the big hot topics. I mean, we heard about it a lot at reInvent, but we're hearing about it a lot in different venues. Is that getting data from one cloud to another is a big deal right now, and it's very difficult to do. And one of the advantages that Snowflake offers its customers is that you can kind of, once you put it in a Snowflake, at least this is how they describe it to me, you can then move it from cloud to cloud with very little, alteration, and that makes it, a very valuable property. And as if to prove that, they got a $479 million investment this week, and their valuation was, believe it or not, $12.4 billion, which I think is the highest private valuation for an enterprise startup ever. I'm not sure of that, but I think it is. You guys might know better than I. And then just consider this: in October 2018,
$3 billion.
they had a valuation of $3.9 billion. So I did the math before I came on here. That's an $8.5 billion difference between October 2018 and 16 months later. And the funny thing is that Frank Slootman, who, as you know, is the CEO there, the really, really good guy, he said they didn't even need this $479 million. But when investors come and they want to be involved, the thing now is like you hear about a lot of companies who are taking huge sums of money who apparently don't need it at that moment. So
Is the This is the hottest IPO. I think the backstory behind this too is Bob Muglia, Microsoft fame. He came in, cleaned up the product, got it ready to go, and they got rid of him.
I know. I don't know what happened there, but I do know that, you know, as far as the IPO, that Slootman told me last week that, you know, usually when you ask the IPO question, you get the standard, well, we're of sufficient size and we could go
for a special event.
But he was actually pretty straight with me, and he said, look, we're going to go. It could be as early as this summer. It could be as late as sometime next year. He claimed he's not under pressure from investors, even though they have, you know, like more than $1 billion into them. But he said, he acknowledged that, you know, the employees who want to get their equity out of the company are, you know, they're hankering to do that. And he doesn't dismiss that. But right now he's like trying to find that, you know, that perfect moment.
He is, and he took the CFO from ServiceNow that he went IPO with as well. I mean, this is going to be the hottest IPO this year in the enterprise side. It is by far the most interesting one that's coming out. But switching topics, coronavirus, Mobile World Congress canceled. I mean, come on, what's going on?
It's pretty amazing.
Oh, this is wild. I mean, I don't know a lot about this, guys. I didn't write about it, but I mean, what I've heard about it, it's pretty crazy. You know, there's a lot of hysteria, is what I'm hearing, and you know, it's a shame, because if you look at what that event brings to the Barcelona economy, it's huge. You know, hotels are crazy priced that week. Every restaurant is full. You know, the subways are mobbed. There's temp jobs for young people who are out of work. I mean, there's just like all kinds of, you know, economic advantages of having this event in the city. And it's really a shame that it's been called off, because it's going to end up, you know, hurting a lot of people who have nothing to do with this. And, you know, again, I don't know the ins and outs. I'm not a you know, expert on viruses, but I can tell you that, you know, having been to that event, it's a major thing, and it's really huge for that city and for the industry that's not going to happen.
One of the biggest tech events in Europe. I mean, CeBIT and, you know, and Mobile World, and you know,
remember Hanover Messe, maybe is the other one.
Yeah.
I mean, the Catalan economy is going to take a big hit there.
Yeah.
So, but it's kind of crazy. I mean, if you think about it, like something like 40 to 50% of the vendors were coming from China that were actually sponsoring the show. So there's definitely a big public health risk in what we haven't seen as a World Health Organization pandemic haven't been announced there. So, but happier stuff. CIA Jedi contract. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know how happy that is, but that's a huge bunch of drama too. I mean, you look at what's going on at. Okay, so I mean, you guys know this story goes back to like 2018, and I've been covering it since very early on.
You were one of the earliest folks on this story.
Yeah, and please, you know, catch up our audience who may not be familiar with this, you know, a $10 billion multi-year contract. And so give us the background, and then what happened with the judge recently.
Okay, so I mean, to try and make a very long story short,
Yeah.
It's a $10 billion 10-year contract, and the way the DoD set it up was winner take all. So instead of saying we're going to look at best of breed and we're going to look at you know, changing cloud landscapes, their argument was, we want one vendor and that'll make it easier to kind of manage. So whether you agree with that or not, that was the way they decided to do it. And from the beginning,
DoD contract, okay?
$10 billion. And so, I mean, 10 billion seems like a lot of money, but you know, the worldwide cloud market right now is 100 billion and growing very quickly. But still, to get that contract would be a big deal for any cloud company, because it's the government and it's the military. And if you can create a secure cloud for the military, you can create a secure cloud for a lot of different departments in the government and the private sector. Okay, so that's the kind of the backstory. Then you had every cloud company wanted in on this, you know, and you know, of course, you know, Google's dropped out early because they got protests from their employees. Oracle was protesting anywhere it could, to the government agencies that were our watchdogs of government procurement, to the federal court. They lost on every count. And what their claim was, what Oracle claimed was that the contract was designed specifically for Amazon to win. So fast forward to April of last year, and the DoD says there are two finalists, Microsoft and Amazon. And then fast forward to October of this year,
Right.
and they choose Microsoft. Now, that was a huge surprise to everybody because I think conventional wisdom would have said it was going to be Amazon. But if you go back to August, you had the president intervening and asking the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, to review the contract process. And then there's, reports that he told Jim Mattis at one point, who was the Secretary of Defense, that he didn't want Jeff Bezos, this company, to have this contract. So there's all kinds of political drama around it. And then they choose Microsoft, and Amazon's not happy. So Amazon goes to court and says, this wasn't right. They say there was political interference on the part of the president, which is, they claim, unprecedented in a government procurement contract. And then they said, if you look at, just the merits of how they compare to Microsoft on the RFP, they believe that on the majority of them, they were better in terms of what the government was looking for, what the DoD was looking for. So you have all that, okay? And then they said, okay,
this is a Netflix series by now.
if you
Might show up on Amazon Prime too, but we don't have no conflict of interest in that show.
if you put the brakes on, if you have a protest, typically in a government procurement protest,
Yes.
the project does not get started until the dispute is settled, right? This is not abnormal. So Amazon went to court last month and said, okay, let's do the normal thing. Let's stop this before it starts, and then let's adjudicate this and figure out who's the winner. So yesterday,
There's a crosstown rivalry here too. Bezos and Satya don't really get along either. So.
Well, there's all kinds of, there's all kinds of, backstories here. But this week, the court ruled that yes, it should be held up until a decision is made. And then they made them pay $42 million as a bond in case, if it turns out to be a frivolous action, which I honestly don't think it is. I think regardless of the outcome, they have the evidence in a case to make that this is worth protesting, right? So it's stopped now. There's nothing going on with there's all this politics, there's all this money, and there's these two, as you say, cloud rivals, in each in the corner, and trying to get this contract, and it's a big deal.
So you've been covering this from the get-go, probably most knowledgeable about all of the backstories and front stories. What do you think? And I don't want to put you on the spot, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. But where do you see next steps? And fast forward a couple of years, and what happens? And I'm assuming it's not. I'm assuming it's a year or more to get to final disposition, but maybe not. What are your thoughts?
I really don't know how long this is going to take. Yeah. This has already taken way longer than people expected it to take. If you talked about the CIA contract, which I wrote about last week, they're doing a somewhat similar kind of bidding process, but they're not going to go with a single vendor. Their feeling is the kind of thing that I talked about up front on this, is that if you go with multiple vendors, you'll get the best of what each has to offer at any particular moment in time.
Absolutely.
So,
well, actually, what's also interesting is there are at least 10 more contracts of this size coming out in procurement, right? So this isn't the first. This is the first of many big battles out there. Why don't we just make this multi-cloud and everyone can participate? I
think that's what private companies are doing. So maybe the government should be doing that as well. So that's all an argument to be made there, Ray. But this is the way DoD decided to do it, and it hasn't really, it's been a lot of drama all the way through this process, and it doesn't seem like it's going to stop. And to answer your question, Vala, I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I don't know if this contract, if this whole idea ends up getting tossed out and they start again and go the CIA's route, or what happens. I am not privy to any information on this, and I'm just speculating. But who knows what's going to happen?
You mentioned Google. You mentioned 10 billion, and certainly you wrote about the latest earnings for Google Cloud at a run rate of 2.61 billion quarterly. You're talking about a $10 billion run rate. Talk about the Google Cloud and where they are and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that they were very forthcoming with their cloud numbers this time, which is not been the case in the past. And so usually you can draw the conclusion if they're not sharing the numbers, they're not very good, right? I mean, that would be the thinking, right? And so they decided to share them, and they're pretty good. I mean, they're not great compared to Amazon and Microsoft.
On YouTube, 15 billion.
Yeah,
that was an unbelievable
Those are
first-time
amazing.
breakout. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
So I mean, 2.6 billion is good. It shows that Kurian has been there for a year now, exactly a year, I think, almost exactly a year. And he brought in this guy from SAP to run sales. He brought in Amit Savory to be his president of the cloud division. I mean, he's got these very, very decade-long experience, multiple decades of experienced people in place, and it seems to be working, right? And they're not. I mean, you're not going to go from 0 to 100 right away, but to go to a $2.61 billion quarter, I mean, they need to build on this. They need to put quarter on top of quarter on top of quarter. But as I've written, and as you guys know, the cloud business is huge, and it's still a huge potential market out there. And there's money to be made. I don't know that Google will ever be as big as Microsoft and Amazon are right now. But if Google can become a substantial business, then when you put that together with everything else Google is doing, I think that's good enough.
Absolutely.
And
this cloud thing has got legs.
Yeah, it's got legs. It's got legs. It's got legs. And it's and $10 billion is no longer a rounding error for Google, right? It used to be a rounding error, like Google Cloud. The number was like, okay, a couple $1 billion, who cares? This is a serious business, and probably one of the few things that Google moved beyond being a one-trick pony in advertising, which is what some of the challenge has been. But God, this is only February, right? Think about the news already. I mean, this is a very fast Q1 so far. Anything else you're looking at right now?
Yeah, where are you going next? Where are you physically going to be next?
What are you covering?
I'm in the next place I actually go to is Google next.
Good segue.
Good segue. Good segue. Oh man, this is great. We've got Ron Miller, enterprise tech reporter, always giving us this. You've been on 11 times, according to Aubrey. DisrupTV. So that's the amount that we got. So
that's awesome. Final before we go. All right, I know how you felt about Mookie Betts, and it sucks. Predictions about Brady. I mean,
stay or go.
I mean, that's as unknown as the Jedi contract.
It's up there with the Jedi contract.
We
don't want to put Ron Miller on record, but yeah, I'm telling you.
I hope he stays. That's all I'll say. I hope he stays. I don't want to see him in another uniform. That'll be painful.
Yeah, but my prediction, he's going to go.
Yeah.
All right. Last word there. So, hey, Ron, thanks a lot for being on the show. Thanks for being here on
having me.
11
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day to you two guys.
Thanks.
Wow.
That's all. I tell you what, it's even better to have you in person. I got to tell you, because usually, we close the browser window and we're done. Now you won't see it, but after we finish, we're going to give a big hug to each other and maybe even share a coffee. So that's awesome. Next week, episode 179. We're getting closer. So this year we'll cross 200 episodes. We have, oh God, you got to help me with the last name.
Rami Nustat, I think.
Author of You Can Have It All, Not Just at the Same Time, a guide for women everywhere. Vijay Sandram's Chief Strategy Officer at Zoho. And Nicole France, one of our other favorites, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research. If you want to talk about user experience and how to delight stakeholders, there's no better person to learn from than Nicole. So it's going to be an amazing show next Friday. And if it's Friday, it's Disrupt. Ray, closing remarks.
I can't believe we're here. 4 years. We're in.
Yeah, 4 years, guys. 179, close to 400 unique guests. And I tell you, when we talk about the importance of staying teachable, this is how we stay teachable. So if you want to learn about a topic, please recommend a guest to our incredible producer, Aubrey Coggins. You can follow her at AubreyUT.
Aubrey _
yeah. And on Twitter. And follow us at DisrupTV Show. And recommend who you want to see on the show. Now, to be honest with you, I think until July we're booked. So you're really giving us guests for the second half of the year. But we love to hear from you.
Yeah, and make sure to catch us live February 26th, 27th Ambient Experience Summit in Atlanta at the Porsche headquarters, also known as the Avengers headquarters, if you know what you're doing. So happy Friday, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.